You know, there are many things in life which we just take for granted. That the sun will come up in the morning, that the air we breathe isn't going to kill us, or that the ground that we walk on isn't just suddenly going to open up beneath our feet. But as regular viewers of this channel will know, we can't always count on what we take for granted. For example, the unfortunate residents of the town of Yungay didn't get to see the sunrise after being buried under millions of tons of avalanche debris. And the poor people in the villages around Lake Neos found out that it is possible that the air that we breathe can suddenly be replaced with a lethal gas. As for the ground beneath our feet, well, on May the 4th, 1971, the inhabitants of the small Canadian village of St Jean Vianney discovered that this too can't be taken for granted. St Jean Vianney was a small village located some 200 kilometres north of Quebec City. It was founded in 1951, and by 1971 it had a population of just over 1,200. Now, there aren't many photographs of what the village looked like before disaster struck, but from what little information there is, it looks like the village was comprised of a scattering of older buildings, and then mostly identical one-storey wooden houses which were built along two parallel streets, Rue Stanley and Rue Saint-Georges. There was a church, a school, a gas station, and a village shop. Surrounding all this were gently rolling fields punctuated by lakes and forests. All in all, it seemed a pretty safe spot. No nearby volcanoes or avalanche-prone mountains in sight. But the danger for St Jean Vianney was a hidden one, a danger which, given the right set of circumstances, could be lethal. And those circumstances were met on the night of May the 4th, 1971. What no one realised at the time was that the village had been built on the top of a thick layer of Champlain sea clay, or as it's more commonly known, quick clay. Now when it's dry, quick clay resembles most other clays. It's heavy, somewhat sticky and dense, and obviously you can walk around and build things on it. But quick clay has a very unique property which differentiates it from other clays, and that is that under certain circumstances it can liquefy. It can just turn almost instantaneously from solid to liquid, and anything built on the top will just plop down straight into it. Now, the spring of 1971 had been unusually warm and wet for the region of Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. The early spring thaw had melted much of the frozen groundwater, and at the end of April the region around St Jean Vianney was hit with a torrential rainstorm, a storm which lasted 3 whole days and nights. The ground beneath the village had become completely saturated, and the groundwater running through the clay bed was slowly leaching the clay of its salt concentration. Now, this little detail is important, as it was the salt contained within the pore water of the clay that kept the structure in its solid state. Once the salt concentration had become less than 1 gram per litre, the quick clay could undergo structural failure and liquefy. For weeks there had been signs that the ground close to the village was settling. Cracks had appeared in the roads, some house foundations had sunk a little, and there was the constant noise of running water and weird thumping noises coming from beneath the ground. But no one was prepared for the scale and the speed with which the next event unfolded. Now, the situation reached its critical moment at around 10:40 p.m. on the night of the 4th of May. As many residents were relaxing in their homes watching a hockey match on TV or reading in bed, the entire eastern end of the village suddenly fell into the ground. Houses, cars, buses, people simply just dropped 100 foot or so down into a massive crater of liquefied clay. This enormous sinkhole was estimated to be some 3.5 million square feet in area, containing an incredible 243 million square feet of material. A massive pocket of quick clay which had simply turned into a liquid and collapsed in on itself. For the people at the eastern end of the village who were caught in the collapse, there was no time to react and pretty much no hope of survival once you were inside the crater. Pushed on by the massive amounts of groundwater still flowing through the clay, the enormous crater of mud began to surge towards the Saguenay River, rolling down the small valley in the form of a 35 feet high wall of mud. It was so powerful that this wall of mud just lifted up a 140-foot concrete bridge that was in its path and swept it along with the flow like this thing was just a wooden log. Behind the flow, the edges of the crater continued to crumble inwards, pulling more houses down into the canyon of flowing clay. Most residents who had not already ended up in the crater did have time to flee the crumbling cliff edges, and they ran up the road towards the church. One resident, Francois Richard, remembered the chaos. "I was in my living room watching a hockey game on TV. I heard shouting and crashing outside. I walked down the street. I could see houses falling into something, going one by one." Bus driver Charles Girard and his passengers had a very close call indeed. As the front wheels of the bus reached the gully, the soil in the front of the vehicle just disappeared, and the bus got stuck on the edge of the slide with its front wheels in the air. Girard then ordered the 18 passengers to escape through the rear door, and was the last man to leave the bus. He then ran in a westerly direction for about 300 feet, and reported running on what seemed to be like moving stairs. The ground was just crumbling away underneath him as fast as he was running. Girard had time to alert the inhabitants of house number 75, but unfortunately not those in houses number 33, 34 and 76, which he saw disappear into the crater with a sudden vertical movement. By morning, the extent of the tragedy was clear for all to see. The eastern ends of Rue Saint-Georges and Rue Stanley were just no longer there, they just ended in mid-air. Around 40 houses were missing, at least 2 buses and around 50 cars had been swallowed up, and 31 people had lost their lives. I read one eyewitness report saying that one woman was rescued as she managed to keep on the top of the roof of her car as it wallowed at the edge of the crater, but this single incident seems to be the only rescue that took place. You either got out okay, or you sank in the mud, and that was that. It was over. As reporters and camera crews arrived, houses continued to topple into the crater and were quickly swallowed up by the torrent of muddy clay. Dramatic photographs show vehicles precariously perched on the edges of ravines. In a disaster of such magnitude, there's absolutely no hope of cleaning anything up or reinforcing the remainder of the village to make it safe again for the surviving residents. St Jean Vianney was basically a write-off. The authorities decided that the area was too dangerous for anyone to remain, and the entire site was evacuated. The remaining residents were relocated to the nearby town of Arvida. Today, the crater itself is, of course, still there, although the landscape is now green and forested, and it's apparently a nice place to go to do some hiking. As for the village, there's not much left to show that it was ever there. Today, just 2 cracked and overgrown tarmac streets, the graffitied water tower and the church steps are pretty much all that remains of the little village of St Jean Vianney.